Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special Try This at Home episode here on the Tarot Podcast. Today, we're going to do it. We're going to ask the most important question we ever ask the cards, which is not how do we solve world peace, or how can we all live together in a functional democracy, or even is there intelligent life in the universe? No, my friends. The burning question we're going to address today is this one: do they like me? If you're listening to or watching this show, you have almost certainly asked your cards this very question at least once in your life, probably several times, hopefully not daily. You've done it, I've done it, everybody's done it. It might even be the reason you got a tarot deck in the first place, honestly. And if that's the case for you, first of all, I want to say there is no shame in that. We are human beings. And to be honest, we're probably at our most human when we are vulnerable, when we're susceptible, when we are in very real danger of falling in love. It's a wonderful time and a terrible time. And when our uncertainty rises to a fever pitch, that is also coincidentally, exactly the kind of moment when we tend to turn to tarot. You will sometimes hear professional readers like myself making fun of the do they like me question. And that is simply because we hear it so very often. Reading about relationships is at least 50%, probably more, of what we do. But personally, relationship readings are actually my favorite kind of reading because what could possibly matter more? We really care about our relationships, and tarot responds to that. The thing that has your undivided attention is the very thing that tarot is going to want to talk to you about. Now, very often people say to me, I'm so embarrassed, but I really need to know about love. I really need to know about my relationship. And I always say, don't be embarrassed. It's completely normal. And what's more, it's not a bad idea at all to ask a professional to read your cards for you when it's about your relationship, because it's very difficult to read for yourself when it comes to these intense feelings. That said, in this episode, I'm going to teach you how you can do just that. Which is why the actual name of this episode is not Do They Like Me, but The Relationship Spread. You heard it right. The Relationship Spread. All you will ever need to find out about this very, 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 very pressing question that we all care about a lot. Now, as you may have already guessed, in fact, asking, do they like me, is actually not the best way to approach reading about relationships. Honestly, it might be one of the worst. Why? Because let us not forget here that you get to choose. You're in charge of this really important decision about whether you're going to invite someone to come closer in to the experience of your one wild and precious life. So, the first question you want to ask is not, do they like me, but do I like them? And you don't even need cards to answer that one. If you're asking your cards, do I like them? Well, maybe you want to be fishing in a bigger pond, is all I'm saying. The other danger in asking, do they like me, is that it can kind of blind you to your own sense of worth. Like semantically, this question kind of assumes that if only you were good enough, or hot enough, or confident enough, then she or he or they would like you. And that is nonsense, of course. The only person who gets to decide if you're good enough, or hot enough, or confident enough is you. And if you can satisfy yourself, your biggest critic, your meanest self, then you can be damn sure you're more than good enough for anybody else. Remember what the great Eleanor Roosevelt said: what other people think of me is none of my business. Now, that doesn't mean we can't get any information about what's going on in this other person's head. I'm just saying that that doesn't need to be the focus. That doesn't need to be the most important thing in this relationship reading we're about to do. Now, we are definitely going to find out some information about this relationship or potential relationship. But before we do, there is one more thing you got to ask yourself, and that is, do you really wanna know? I think you wanna know. Right now, it might seem like nothing could be more important than knowing. But let's take a beat, because when we do this reading, it is entirely possible that you will get an answer that is not what you're secretly hoping for. This reading might say, "I'm terribly sorry, but it doesn't look like it's gonna happen." This reading might say, "Oh, it'll happen, but it's going to be a hot mess." If you don't want to hear that, if you don't want to know that it's not going to happen or that it's not going to be great, then this is not the time to do relationship divination. If you can't take no for an answer, then you're asking the wrong question. In fact, what I like to say is this: if yes is the only acceptable answer, do magic, not divination. Divination is for finding out information, magic is for getting results. Now, the magical ethics of getting someone to fall in love with you are very questionable. So I'm not going to get into that. But my point is, this relationship or potential relationship matters. So you want to take it seriously and be honest about your feelings. You want to feel your feelings. And this is true whenever you're doing tarot. You want to feel your feelings, but not to the point where you're ignoring reality. It's quite difficult, actually, to feel all these intense emotions, yet also somehow be able to contain them while you are doing this reading and asking for an objective opinion from the cards. You want to feel intensely, but still keep breathing and remain calm. And needless to say, you don't want to do this drunk or high. That would be like trying to cook a meal, but all you have is a flamethrower and a bunch of ghost peppers. There will be tears. Do it when you're calm. Do it when you're rested. Do it when you're as relatively sane as you can be as this particularly insane moment in your life. Anyway, if you find you just can't do this objectively, it is totally okay to ask a professional either to pull cards for you or to help you interpret the cards you did pull. All right, let's get into it. The relationship spread is very simple. All we're going to do is draw two cards, one for each of you, but we're going to do it mindfully. And by the way, for those of you who are interested in more than one person, you can still do this, but you still only want to do two cards at a time. One card is always you, and one card is always someone else. We're going to start by shuffling. And you can do this any way you want, it really doesn't matter. Then we're going to split the deck into two halves, one for each person, again, any way you want, doesn't matter. Now, you're going to choose which half is your half. Always start with yourself. Which of these halves feels more like it's yours? Which one are you more drawn to? And maybe you don't have a feeling about that, in which case, just pick one. Don't worry, you won't choose the wrong one. Fate is holding your hand and she won't steer you wrong. Okay, so you have your pile. The other pile belongs to the other person, and we're going to set that aside for a minute. Let's focus on your pile. Now, there are different ways to pick a card out of this pile, all of which are valid. The way I like to do it is this: I'm going to spread the cards out. And while we're doing this, I want you to connect with a certain part of yourself. Within you are many different selves. You are somebody's child. You are maybe somebody's sibling. Maybe you're someone's colleague or boss. You're definitely someone's friend. And in each of these roles, you're a little bit different. But right now, we want to connect with the part of you that is romantically interested in this other person, the part that comes out when you're around them. Let us allow this aspect of you to rise to the surface. You feel intrigued. You feel curious. You feel a little self conscious, maybe. This is what you're like when you're attracted to someone else. We are going to invite this precious, private part of you to draw a card. When you're ready, pick a card. Don't forget to keep breathing. And when you've got it, set it aside, face down. You can put aside that pile, you're done with it. And now we're going to turn our attention to the other pile. So, this pile belongs to the other person, this person you're interested in. And while we're spreading our cards, we're going to shift our headspace to connect with them. Doesn't matter if you don't know their whole life story, you know enough just from having been exposed to them. What you want to do is imagine them walking into an empty room. Observe how their presence shifts the atmosphere in the room slightly. Notice how they carry themselves, how they breathe. What are they like? Okay, and now they're looking at you and they see you. Notice their expression, nothing more than that, and then go ahead and draw a card. We've got our two cards, and now comes the important part. We're gonna interpret them. Now, the question we're going to ask ourselves while we're interpreting what we see in these cards is not, does this person like that person? Or does that person like this person? Or what are they thinking about me? Or anything like that. We're just going to ask, what is the dynamic here? The great benefit of tarot is that it allows you to look at your situation from the outside. So even if you're deep in your feels, you can borrow some objectivity from the cards. You can just look at these two people and ask, what is happening here? Okay, drum roll, moment of truth. Let's turn them over. Woo! Look at that. We have the Queen of Swords and the Page of Pentacles. Now, right away, I have to tell you that a really weird but common phenomenon just happened, which is that we got two court cards. I say it's common because that actually happens a lot in relationship readings. And it's super weird because of the math, which I just have to take a minute to tell you about. If you draw two cards from a 78 card tarot deck, there are 3,003 possible two card combinations. Of those 3,003 combinations, there are only 120 possible combinations of two court cards. 120 out of 3,003 is 3.99%. So basically 4%. And I can tell you that when I'm doing relationship readings, I get two court cards way more than 4% of the time. And I did draw these two cards randomly, by the way. Is just one of those spooky things about tarot. Why does tarot like to turn up court cards for a relationship reading? We can speculate. But right now, I'm going to focus on these two people and their problem. I'm going to call them Jesse and Harper because it's just easier if I give them names. I literally drew the names out of a hat, or rather, I drew them out of an empty Altoids tin because I have about a million of those. And by the way, as always, remember that gender is not necessarily a thing here. It doesn't matter that Jessie is a queen here. Although it is true that some Jessies will happen to be women, and some Jessies will happen to be queens, and some Jessies will happen to be neither. If the card matches the way you present or identify gender wise, that's great. That's another layer. But if it doesn't, don't worry about it. Okay, step one. The first thing I'm going to do is check out where the figures in these cards are looking, which is super easy with court cards because courts are almost always looking in a particular direction. In this case, Jesse is looking at Harper, but Harper is looking over here. Maybe they're looking at their pentacle, or maybe they're looking at somebody else. And if you want to get fancy, you could draw a card over here to see who or what they're looking at. The important thing here is that they're not looking at each other. So, yes, Jesse is checking out Harper, but Harper seems kind of oblivious. When two cards are looking at each other, I immediately start to think, aha, something might be happening here. There might be some kind of awareness between these two people. But in this case, we don't have that. Next step, I'm going to look and see if they're in the same suit. And clearly, they are not. Jesse is a sword and Harper is a pentacle. Now, if they were both swords or both pentacles, then I would say that maybe there was some basic compatibility there. And the suit could possibly tell me what kind of compatibility. Like if they were both swords, there might be a real intellectual meeting of the minds happening. And there are also suits which get along well, like swords and wands can do well together, or pentacles and cups can do well together. This is all based on elemental correspondences. And if you're interested, you can read a lot more about that in my book, Tarot Correspondences, if that's interesting to you. It's called Elemental Dignity. But what we have here is a sword and a pentacle. And if you know your correspondences, then you know that swords relate to air and pentacles relate to earth. Air and earth do not get along. They're opposites, like fire and water. So not only are these two not looking at each other, they are also opposed elementally. And yes, you can use elemental correspondences with the major arcana as well, but it's not quite as obvious. Now, I'm not saying that swords and pentacles can never be together. That would be tragic. But it might take a bit of willingness to compromise and a bit of work on both sides for this to happen. Now, because we have two court cards, we can add a third step here, which is to compare the rank. In this case, a queen versus a page. This does not necessarily indicate a difference in age, although it can, but it definitely indicates some kind of difference in experience. Like in this case, Harper as the page looks relatively inexperienced compared to Jessie the queen. That could mean that Harper has not been in a lot of relationships, or it could mean that Harper is currently in a place where they are not thinking about relationships or maybe just starting to. Now we can pull it all together and maybe even color in more of the story. And here's where we draw in some of the other things we may know about these cards from studying them. For example, the Queen of Swords is the queen who typically is the least coupled up of the queens. So if I saw these two cards, I might speculate that Jessie is fresh off a breakup, or at least has been a bit traumatized by their last relationship. Maybe Jesse did not even expect to be looking for love when Harper caught their eye. But then Jesse found themselves thinking, maybe I could use a fresh start with this totally new person who doesn't seem scarred or carrying a lot of baggage. But as I said before, Harper is just not in the same situation. Harper is focusing on something else. Maybe they are a student, which is often the case with pages and especially Page of Pentacles. Maybe they are just concerned with getting through their studies or holding down their job right now. So, that's one way this story might look. In a sense, the details are not that important because the main takeaway here is that this does not look like a great romance that's about to blossom between these two. You probably noticed I used a lot of perhaps and might and maybe and could be when describing what I saw. That's because no single one of these observations was necessarily a deal breaker, but taken all together, I have to say I just don't see it happening. I would advise Jesse not to get too caught up in Harper right now and maybe focus on healing themselves, at least for a while. Okay, so that's one example of the relationship spread. Of course, there are many other ways this could go. In fact, 3002 different ways this could go, not counting reversals. We can't begin to cover all the ramifications, but remember to check out one, whether they are looking at each other, two, whether they are in the same suit or element, and three, anything else you can bring in from your tarot studies and what you know about these cards to help you understand what kind of personalities are showing up in these two cards and how they might interact with one another. If you don't get a clear sense of what's going on in the first 5 minutes, don't toss the reading. Leave it out for a few days. Learn some more about the cards and see if you can make a meaningful story out of what you learned. Okay, here's a few general guidelines that might help. If you see a court card, like we just did, you can assume you are looking at the persona that person is inhabiting vis a vis relationships. If you see major arcana, you can assume that something major is going on for that person that will affect how and whether they enter into a relationship. It might be something external, like a big change in life circumstances, or it might be something internal, like an emotional upheaval or spiritual calling or their Saturn return or whatever. If you see minor arcana, ace through 10 cards, that gives you some insight into the everyday events or moods that might affect the relationship or potential relationship. If you see multiple people in a card, it might even give you some sense of one person's attitude toward the other, whether they actually have some romantic interest or if the other person is firmly in the friend zone. And finally, what about reversals? What if the cards come out upside down? Well, that's a topic for a whole nother day. But for now, a great way to read reversals simply is just to say it's up in the air. The situation might be more fluid. In fact, full disclosure, Harper and Jesse's cards came up reversed originally. It did not substantially alter the way I read them, but with the reversal, I would just add that there might be a lot of churn in the dating lives of these two people, so things might take a while to settle down. Also, a reversal in a relationship reading can cause a person to now be looking away from instead of toward the other person, or vice versa. And as we know, the direction of the gaze is absolutely critical. Ideally, you want the cards to be looking at each other, even if that means one of them has to be upside down. After all, in every relationship, there's always going to be some kind of accommodation, right? Maybe you have to stand on your head sometimes to make it work. This was just one reading, but if you'd like to see a few more examples of relationship readings, check out this week's exclusive Patreon content. There you can find a few more examples of relationship readings I did for made up people, and hopefully that will help you as you're unpacking your own spreads. After you've done the reading and gotten a clear answer, your job is to accept the answer, which may not be easy. Our friend Jesse, for example, may need to make a really conscious effort not to obsess over Harper. Jesse may need to find some distraction by going out with friends or taking a kickboxing class or getting into craft cocktails. But even if the answer is positive, don't leave it to fate. You still have to act. You might even need to take the initiative and ask the person out for a coffee or engineer a reason to spend the day together. You are in possession of some priceless information, but it's worthless if you don't act on it. Which brings me to another important point. This reading is so powerful that you're probably going to want to do it again like next week. But I am telling you, don't. I like to say that in tarot, every reading is a sacrifice, which literally means making something sacred. What you sacrifice in a reading is your doubt. What you get in return is meaning. And if you question your reading, in other words, if you allow your uncertainty to get the better of you, that means you're taking back your doubt. And if you take back your doubt, that means you have to give back the meaning you received as well. It invalidates the reading, is what I'm saying. That is why when you read over and over again for the same subject, the answers become more and more meaningless. I'm speaking from experience. So remember that meaning exists in an inverse relationship with doubt. Do not read again until circumstances vastly shift. And by vastly shifting, I don't mean that now it's Thursday and you feel even more strongly about this person than you did yesterday. Or you heard there's a party and you're definitely going to see them there. Those are not real shifts of circumstance. A real shift of circumstances involves major life changes. Like, for example, let's say you normally only see this person maybe once a month in passing. A real life change is that they somehow end up moving and sharing an apartment with your best friend. So now you run into them a couple times a week. That's different. A real life change is that you start working on a project together and now you guys have to meet regularly. Or on the flip side, a real life change could mean that one of you moves to a different country. These kinds of changes alter the calculus of opportunity for the both of you. And at that point, which is probably months or even years after your original question, you are, for all intents and purposes, different people from who you were. And I personally think it is okay to ask fate if these two new people belong together. Now, in the meantime, if nothing has changed, but you still really want to talk to Tarot about your problem, go back to the same cards you drew. Go back to those two cards and see if you can add additional layers to your perception. There's a lot to learn about every card, so study them, learn their correspondences, learn more about their history and how they might interact. Also, look at times when you've drawn them before and what happened when you did. At the very least, you might get some answers as to why the situation is not developing. If you've enjoyed exploring the relationship spread with me, you can find many more 2 and 3 card spreads to practice in my book, The Living Tarot. Or if you prefer an online learning environment, you can always join my class, also called The Living Tarot. And remember, you can get a discount on the class if you've bought the book. All you got to do is email me with your receipt. Links to all of that you can find, as always, in the show notes. If you do the relationship spread, and I have a hunch you will, let me know what happens. What did you learn? Was it what you expected? How will you act on it? You can write to me either on Discord if you're a Patreon member or by writing and using the contact form at thetarotpodcast.com. That's our episode. Until next time, keep shuffling and don't be afraid to see what's in the cards for you.